Hi, I'm Tom Maer's, and I'm pleased to welcome you to the Anatomy Trains Technique series of videotapes. These tapes are designed as a memory aid for any of you who have been in my classes before, and would also be suitable for any manual therapist who wants to add fascial plane release techniques to their structural repertoire. These tapes are specifically designed to give you the feel, the kinesthetic feel of these fascial and myofascial releases, and as such, they come with a few cautions and a few suggestions. The first caution is that these tapes are long on technique, but short on both anatomy and assessment. In terms of the anatomy, we covered this in tape 2 of this series, the Anatomy Trains Overview. It's also covered in my book on the anatomy trains. Well, if you don't have either of those, you can follow along with a good anatomy atlas of your choice. Though we will do a little bit of assessment with each tape, the judgment of when to use each of these techniques is really left to you. You can get more help with the assessment in the Anatomy Trains book, again, or in tapes 3, 4, and 5 of this series, or by attending any of a number of structurally oriented classes, such as those we offer at our kinesis school. Believe me, I am very aware of the limitations of trying to teach these techniques, which rely on your kinesthesia and your sensitive perception in the body via a medium which is totally visual and auditory. To ease this, we have created a kind of classroom situation in which you'll see me demonstrate the techniques, but you'll also see a student imitating the techniques, and the client comments on how we get there. I think this will make it easier for you to recreate the feeling of these techniques. Though we will be showing you the techniques in some detail, we're not interested in your slavishly imitating them exactly as they are on the video. These are, call them templates for our techniques. They can be applied in different ways to suit particular clients and particular problems. Once you get the feel of the technique, you can work creatively with it to apply it in many different ways. And we hope that's what you'll do based on what you see here. For ease of learning, we're going to start at one end and work our way up to the other. In practice, this may be the way that you work. It's an okay way to work, but it's certainly not the only way to work by any means. You might start with an area that is particularly held or particularly tight or short, and work out along the line and in both directions from there, and then return to this difficult area toward the end of the session. So what we're going to show is a way, but not the way, of approaching this myofascial meridian. We hope that you enjoy and learn from these videos. Of course, we'd love to see you in a class also, since the learning is often better face-to-face and hand-to-hand. But let's see what we can do with this electronic medium.
From the top of the toes, underneath the retinaculum at the ankle, up the anterior compartment of the leg, through the kneecap, up the front of the thigh to the pelvis, jumping across to the rectus abdominis, up the chest on the sternalis fascia, onto the sternocleidomastoid, all together running up the front of the body in the superficial front line.
So let's very quickly review the anatomy. Again, the anatomy is reviewed in more detail on tape 2 of this series, but let's just take a look at it quickly. If you look at this line, it's going to cover 5 tracks of soft tissue stretch with 7 stations or bony attachments in between. So if we started from the bottom and look, we see that the first track goes from the top of the toes underneath the retinacula to just below the knee on the tibial tuberosity. That would include the tissue on the front of the tibia. Continuing straight up from there, we pick up from the tibial tuberosity the subpatellar tendon, and that takes us through the kneecap and onto the quadriceps, and this will be territory that we'll be working, particularly the rectus femoris, which travels up and then tucks into a little pocket between the tensor fascia lata and the sartorius at the top. It actually attaches to the anterior inferior iliac spine, but it's pretty close to that little knobbly bit on the front of your hip. The second part of this line takes off from the pubic bone, going up with the rectus abdominis and the associated abdominal fasciae, and makes it up to the 5th rib, and continuing on up from there, straight up along the sternal fascia, the sternalis muscle, and the sternal fascia, especially where the ribs meet the sternum in the sternal chondral joints. That carries us right up the sternum to the handle, the manubrium of the sternum, and at the sternal notch we pick up the sternocleidomastoid, which goes from the front of the neck across the neck to the back of the skull. This leads us into the meaning of this line because a very interesting thing with human beings. If you look at any self-respecting quadruped, they protect their soft, sensitive bits. The throat is protected under the chin. The breasts are protected under the arm or the leg. The stomach is protected by the back. The genitals are protected by the leg. The groin is protected by the leg. Not us. We human beings, we take every soft, sensitive bit that we have, we put them all up front. Face, breast, soft underbelly, groin, genitals, we put them all up front on the same line, and we walk them forward into the world pretty much on the same plane. So much so that we've actually invented gestures or signs when we meet each other. We reach out and we shake hands, which is a way of saying, I promise not to grab your soft, sensitive bits. So the sensitivity of what goes on in a human being along the front line, either we are absolutely foolhardy or we have a great act of psychological faith here in putting the front of our body in the way that we do. But we shouldn't be surprised, because it isn't a joking matter when people get traumatized. In cases of physical trauma, emotional trauma, or just having more emotions than you can handle, the tendency to shrink back and to protect and to shorten this front line is almost universal. And this, of course, you've never seen this kind of pattern coming into your practice. This is the kind of pattern that you will see out of a short front line. The superficial front line pulls the ribs down toward the pubic bone, pulls the chest down towards the ribs, and pulls the head forward as it does. This is the pattern that you're looking at when somebody comes into your office and they're often complaining about headaches or pains in their neck or their upper back, but where they need to be worked is not in the head or the neck or the upper back. What needs to happen is that the front line of the body needs to be lifted up to restore the balance of the head. So if you'll look on the slide here, you'll see a very similar picture of a man just before and just after a starter gun was fired behind his head. Just a blank pistol, nothing to hurt him, but the noise surprised him, and what you're seeing in the second picture is the result of this surprise. And this is not just a European response. It would be the same for someone from East Timor or Nicaragua or Malawi. It's a human response, and it's called the startle response. And you can see now that if we look at this, that the startle response could be otherwise defined as a shortness of the upper superficial front line. So as we go into working with the superficial front line, I want you to have an understanding of this, because this startle response, well, in an animal, they would have a startle response and go into the startle response, and 30 seconds later or a minute later or an hour later, when the danger was gone, they would let go of the startle response and go back to their regular state. The difference between an animal and a human being is that we are so attuned to our inner psychosocial environment that when we go into this startle response, we can stay there for the next 20 or 30 years, kept there by our psychological structures. And these psychophysical patterns, when you come to work with the superficial front line, you need to understand its sensitivity and the tendency of the body to protect all those sensitive spots that we were talking about, the groin and the breast and the soft underbelly. By shortening the superficial front line, we protect those spots. We go back to something earlier, something smaller, something more quadrupedal. And when we work with the superficial front line, we give people the opportunity to work out of those patterns to feel the full, what you might call upfront feeling. Now, not that every time that you work on the superficial front line that you're working with deep psychological issues, but I do want us to have that in mind as we go into working on the superficial front line. So, let's go.
To recap then, from the top of the toes, underneath the retinaculum at the ankle, up the anterior compartment of the leg, through the kneecap, up the front of the thigh to the pelvis, jumping across to the rectus abdominis, up the chest on the sternalis fascia, onto the sternocleidomastoid, all together running up the front of the body in the superficial front line.
Okay, so let's begin with the reminder that starting at the foot is just a convention we've adopted for the video for teaching, and that you might start somewhere else on the body, but we'll start from the bottom and work up just so that we can keep things in order. There's not a lot you can do with the tendons on the top of the foot here, which are the first part of the superficial front line, but I do like to get the metatarsals, making sure the metatarsals are loose with each other. And you can take your fingers on the top of the foot. If we can see this up close, and just bring that tissue up the top of the foot, just to wake it up and open up this superficial fascia on top of the tendons. If the foot is not loose, if there's not this differentiation between the metatarsal bones, you might want to take your fingertips and, being careful of fingernails, go down between the metatarsals. You can find little channels between the toes, and you can work those up. We could ask Susan how this feels. How does this feel, Susan? Is this...
It feels great.
Oh, that's good. Even though the tradition that I'm associated with, that of Dr. Ida Rolf, is associated with painful manipulation, I want to make sure from the beginning that I'm not interested in creating pain in the client, which I define as when the client is trying to get away from what you're doing, either mentally or physically. I am interested in creating change in the tissue, and to that end I'd like to go to what a friend of mine called the hedonic point, which means that point right between pleasure and pain. So I can use the client to help me do that. Susan, how does this feel? If I go any deeper, does that start to create more pain?
It hasn't felt painful yet.
All right. If that's as deep as I want to go anyway, I'm getting the change that I want, so if that's fine with her, it's fine with me.
That foot feels like it's loosening up really well. It's been tight ever since it was operated on.
Good. So the first place that we're going to work is on the retinaculum here, and to lift the retinaculum off these tendons. Now when you look in the books, you'll see the retinacula as if they were very precise structures, but in practice they may run down onto the foot and up onto the leg, and you won't feel precise places where these retinacula start and finish. So please notice that I'm using the whole surface of this first knuckle, first finger bone, and by keeping my hand loose, not as a fist like this, keeping my hand loose, my hand conforms to the foot, and as I go up the foot, I'm dropping my elbow, if we can come out a little bit, dropping my elbow to scoop the tissue up off the tendons. All right? Now there's one more piece here, which is, Susan, you bring your foot up and down. Foot straight up and straight down. That's it. Foot up and foot down. So how does that feel to you as I'm doing that, Susan?
It feels like the tissue is stretching a lot.
A little bit burning, or just
a little
stretching?
bit of burning, but basically it still feels good.
Good. And if I let you bring your foot up and down by itself now, can you feel the difference with how it was before? Does it feel a little freer to you?
Yes, it feels like I have a really good range of motion with my foot.
Oiled and lubed. A small amount of lotion, if you need it, is great, but not oil. Susan, bring your foot up, dorsiflex, and plantar flex. And I'm just dropping my elbow and scooping it up. And dropping my elbow elbow. Keep moving, Susan. Dropping my elbow to scoop the tissue off. Okay, Susan, bring your foot up and down. My hand is very soft so that it conforms to the inside of the ankle and brings the tissue up. And by moving, by having the client move, you can feel exactly where you are. The tendons, you want to be on the level above the tendons because that's where the retinaculum is, and as the client moves, you can feel exactly what level those tendons are on. Now let's see what happens when Sunshine tries it on Susan's other leg. So if you, which hand do you use? Your right hand, all right. So let this set of knuckles just come onto the ankle there, good. And now you're going to come down into the tissue to where you feel yourself engaged with that first layer, and then drop your elbow and scoop that tissue up. You want to be as close to these knuckles as you can, just so your arm is headed right down into, that's it. Now, how's that feeling to you?
Good.
So now, Susan, how's it feeling to you?
It feels good. It's very smooth. It's not quite the amount of pressure that you used.
All right. So see if you can, just stop and start again, right in here. And take a few steps back from where you are. That's it, good. So now you can lean down into it, and don't forget to have her move. So Susan, lift your, well, I'll let you tell her.
Lift your foot. Just back and forth.
Just back and forth, lifting and dropping your foot. Do you feel how you can feel the tendons moving under your hand
Yes.
when the foot is moving? So that keeps you oriented. Where you want to be is in the layer right on top of those tendons. That's where the retinacula are.
Okay.
And you're freeing the tendons from the retinacula, or you're freeing actually the retinacula from the tendons. And you'll have it, yeah, you'll just have a feeling that you run out of juice there about 3 inches up. And when you run out of juice, you stop. And just come into your arm with your weight. So some of your weight's going into your foot. You just let that weight down into your arm, just like that. That's great. And Susan moves the foot. Great. Becomes less a matter of strength and just a matter of letting your weight in.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Was that closer, Susan?
That was much closer. It felt like a really steady pressure and smooth, much smoother.
So our next technique is going to continue up the anterior compartment of the leg, principally the tibialis anterior. So I'm going to turn my hand so that my knuckles are near this edge of the tibia, and I'm going to go up Susan's anterior compartment, up the front of her shin, not pressing into the shin bone, and bringing this tissue up. Now, at the same time, I'm going to ask her to do the same movement that we did before of dorsiflexing and plantar flexing, which helps her know where I am, helps me know where she is, and helps the tissue wake up and melt in general. All right, well, so let's have Sunshine try this same thing. The first thing you want to do is make sure that Susan's leg is not laterally or medially rotated. And then just take your hand and turn it so that these knuckles are coming in contact. And again, it's right down through your arm with your weight. That's good. And now as you move up, you get her to dorsiflex and plantar flex. And your idea is not to work hard with your muscles, but just to sink into her leg with your bones, with your weight. Mm-hmm.
How does that feel, Susan?
That feels good. It felt sort of sharp in the beginning, and then it smoothed out as you were working your way up my leg.
Again, Sunshine, if you take a step back with your left foot, with your back foot. Yeah, there. And then, if you push on the ball of your back foot, that just gives your weight to her leg. Do you feel that?
Mm-hmm.
So you don't have to do it with your arms, you can do it with your feet. That's it. Okay, you just stay right close to, that's it. Things are popping. And keep right on going till you get about to here, because that's all that tibialis anterior stuff.
That was much smoother.
Great, just like that. Coming up that way is one way to do it. There's a lot of people for whom the tibialis anterior is really tight. In fact, we would number Susan among these right in here. So sometimes I'll just take these knuckles or even these knuckles, but let's do it with these. And I will sink into the leg like that. And now, Susan, you come up and down. And it's really, I'm not moving at all. It's the client's movement that is doing all of this. But it allows me to sink into her leg a little more deeply. You feel that?
Yes, I do.
Deeper, deeper down in the muscle?
Yes.
It's still not painful,
It
is it?
says, oh, this...
Is it
This was
painful
tight.
or yeah? Yeah. Well, you see, that's where the pain thing becomes funny, because I don't want to impose pain on your body, but there's pain in your body that needs to be exposed. So
Right.
it's a gentle dance that we have to do, because right there things are really
You're
tight.
at the hedonic point.
I'm at the hedonic point. Okay. So Sunshine, you come in and try that. Yeah, whichever one feels more comfortable. And she doesn't move until you get set in. You relax, Susan, and Sunshine, you come in. And when you feel well set up, feel like you're in there, just tell her to dorsiflex and plantar flex. Feel the muscle moving underneath your knuckles?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. For this next technique, we want to include the tissue on the surface of the tibia, and to do that, you need to make your hands into a kind of rooftop. If you take that second knuckle and you put them together like that, so that your underlying hands form a kind of roof, you can put that down on the ankle such that this hand corresponds and kind of melts into the front of the tibia, and this hand melts onto the tibialis anterior. So this is a kind of variation on the other technique, the last technique, but one in which we include the tissue on the front of the tibia. And once again, I'm going to ask Susan to bring her foot up and down, and I'm going to bring my hand up. My knuckles stay together on this. I'm not spreading apart yet. I'm going all the way up the tibia with this. Keep moving, Susan, up. Yep, lovely. And then when I reach the tibial tuberosities, I do spread wide under the knee along the tibial condyles. Great. So, Sunshine, you have a go. Okay, that's great. Just keep those knuckles together. Sink into leg. And do you feel what's between you and the tibia bone here? You're just kind of, there is a layer of fabric, and you're just lifting that layer of fabric off the bone and loosening it from the edge of the bone. You might feel little crunchy things under your hands as you go up that bone. That's calcium lactate, and they will melt and fall away. Great. It looks good. Does it feel good, Susan?
Feels very good.
Good. And so now as you get up to the top of the tibia, you just let your hands spread under those tibial condyles, and eventually you fall off. Yep, just like that. Great. Yeah, if you want to emphasize that with your fingers, you can. Good. Okay, for our next section of this line is the quadriceps muscle, and it starts from that subpatellar tendon below the knee and works its way up along all of these quadriceps muscles, particularly the rectus femoris muscle that runs across the top of the thigh here. Since I'm going to do this with my elbow, I'll just put a little lotion on to make sure I don't skitter and skate up Susan's leg. And I'm not going to start right above the kneecap. I'm going to go an inch or two above the kneecap. And you can see that my hand is relaxed. And I am just going to let my weight sink a little bit. This is a lot easier to get in deeper with my elbow and with my body weight. And I'm just going to sink in a little bit, and I'm going to ask her to bring her knee up and down. And again, I remind you that the movement of the client really helps you know where you are and really helps the client know where you are and where he or she is. So just keep that knee coming up. That's beautiful, and down. And I am, again, lifting this tissue up because of the tendency of the front line to fall down. We're lifting it up. And you can see where I'm headed here is right up to the ASIS, the anterior superior iliac spine. And there I will generally stop. But if you find that the tone of the vastus medialis and the vastus lateralis aren't balanced, in other words, the outer part of the quadriceps is more toned than the inner part, you can, by changing the angle of your elbow, much like bowing on a violin, you just turn the bow on the violin so that it gets a different string, and we can come up like this. Is this okay, Susan?
That's fine.
That's not too deep for you?
No.
All right, and I noticed that I had my hand all tensed up here, so that was, I'll just relax it. The more relaxed I am, the more I can feel in my client. If I'm working out of tension, I can't feel anything going on in the client's body, but as it is, this is the speed at which Susan's tissue is melting. So this is the speed that I will keep. One more thing up here before we leave off this technique. If you come right up to the top, there is the ASIS on the front of the hip bone. So the tensor fasciae lata is coming right down here, and the sartorius is coming right down here. If I want to get to the top of the rectus femoris, there's a pocket right in between those two, and I'm going to sink down into that pocket a little bit. And now I'm going to invite a different movement from Susan. You all right with this?
Yes, that's fine.
It's okay? Okay. So just take your heel and stretch it right over the end of the table. Elongate your leg. You feel that? Yeah, got that tensus right in there. Okay. So I'm going to stay here, and you're going to move your leg. You get to control how much sensation there is by how much you extend your leg.
Okay.
Because I'm not going to move from right here. Got it? There you go. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah? Yeah, and just get that attachment to move on out. That's lovely. So I'm doing nothing, or almost nothing. I am just resting in this little pocket between tensor fasciae lata and sartorius, right there at the top of her thigh, where the rectus is. And this often gets so tight, and it really is, you'll find it, there's a little pocket right in there. And all she has to do is elongate her leg out the back. So I just tell her to send her heel out over the end of the table, and that gets this tissue to open right in here. Great. So let's have Sunshine do the same thing. Although you can't, yeah, a little lotion helps. Although you can't see Sunshine's leg, I'm going to have her put her back leg well back so that she, even though she's sitting on the table, she still has support from behind her body. And yep, do you feel the, notice that you can change how that feels for her with how you rotate the arm. You can make it softer or a little more sharpish by how you rotate the lower arm. And what's the motion that she's going to use? Have her lift her knee and drop her knee. There you go. Just an inch. Not a big lift. Just even thinking about lifting your knee is enough to mobilize those muscles. That's great. So how's that, Susan? Is that?
I think that's a little bit more pressure than you were using, Tom.
Okay.
Is that too much pressure?
Lighten up, you big bully. Yeah. Keep going right at that speed, because that's the speed at which she's melting. Do you feel that?
Yes.
It's happening right ahead of your arm. It's not even right under your arm. It's right ahead of where your arm is. That's great. That's great. Okay. Susan, as you lift your knee, keep this part of your back on the table. So you don't go into a lordotic curve. You don't go into a sway back as you lift your knee. Keep your back nice and flat as she comes up to the top of this. That's it. So you're elongating the back of your hip to lift your knee. Yep. I would love for you, while you're doing this, to have your other hand somewhere on her body, rather than out in the middle of the air. I don't know what it does, but it's something about completing a circuit. The shiatsu people call it the mother hand. Yeah, that's the idea. Okay,
How's that pressure?
now, you see how you're tightening up your belly to get that up there? You stay right, just go really slow right where you are. So when you, go ahead, do it again, so that the folks at home can see how the belly muscles are tightening, yeah? So instead of doing that, elongate the back of your hip. You were doing it when we got closer up to the hip. There you go. Nope. Starting again to work with the belly muscles. Lift the knee and leave the back down. There you go. Better. Because we don't want her to shorten everything up to do this action. We'd like her to elongate into the action, which is sometimes not easy when somebody has an elbow in front of your thigh. So now we have changed so that Sunshine's on the table and Susan's going to work, and the next piece of the superficial front line here is muscularly the rectus abdominis, but fascially this whole superficial abdominal aponeurosis here. And in terms of this superficial front line session, I rarely work below the navel, but sometimes if people are really tight in the belly wall, in the rectus abdominis, I will put my fingers in right about at the level of the navel. There's an inscription, one of those white lines in the six-pack abs, and if you go right into that inscription, do you see what I'm doing with my fingertips? I am straightening my fingers, dropping my elbows, and lifting that tissue up over the ribs. It's essential to see that I'm dropping the heel of my hand, dropping my elbow, so that I'm not pressing into the ribs. It's not like that. It's taking this tissue, going below whatever adipose tissue might be there, catching that fascial plane, and just bringing it up along the ribs. You'll notice that my hands are well away from the center so that I am not pressing on the xiphoid process, but I am lifting up the fascia on the top of the rectus, and there's no harm in taking this and doing it a little bit wider. I strongly urge you against spreading wide from the center line, particularly in postpartum women, but you can go a little bit wider on the ribs and take this up. You'll notice that I'm stopping right around the fifth rib, right around the brow. Okay, so our next technique is going to carry us up along the costal margins of the ribs, along the sternum, and even up onto the collarbone. I call this the I technique because by the time you've finished it on both sides, it looks like the capital letter I. So I'll do it on this side, and then we'll have Susan do it with Sunshine on the other side. Again, I like having both hands on the body, even though you're doing the technique with one hand. I'm going right along the bottom of the ribs here. I'm not really tucking in under the ribs. That would make her feel a little insecure, perhaps. So I'm going right along the bottom of the ribs. I'm being quite gentle with the ribs, but I'm being fairly insistent about bringing the tissue up and in along the costal margins of the ribs with me. And this time I am going to go under the edge of the bra, right along the sternum. If you feel you need to talk to the client beforehand about the fact that you're invading their space. You can, if you're using draping with this, you have to figure that one out, because I usually work in underwear. But if your intention is clear of going up here along the edge of the sternum, you can usually go up here an inch or two without causing any distress. And with these modern sports bras, a lot of territory gets covered, so I usually, to provide a continuity, bring the bra down, and then I'm bringing my fingers up right along the sternochondral margins, where the ribs meet the sternum. So I could be right in the middle of the sternum, but I'm often right out on the edge. And when you get to this top of the sternum here, oh, I know this isn't strictly part of the superficial front line, but all of this fascia really is one and the same. So I'm going out along the edge of the clavicle. Let me try that again so you can see it. Right along the under edge of the clavicle. Yeah, you can sit or kneel, that's great. So just bring your hands underneath the ribs with your fingers that way, and support the outside of the ribs, so that's right. Now you're just going to bring the tissue up along the ribs towards her midline like that, following the edge of the subcostal margin. Yep. Does that give some of the same feeling?
Yeah, you could go a little bit slower.
All right, so let's start that again. Let's have you just come down here and start that again. And what I want you to feel for is the tissue there it goes. Is the tissue melting in front of you? Okay, so you have to go at the rate that tissue softens, liquefies in front of you. Can you feel it?
Yes.
Yeah, great. And now your hand just rolls over towards the palms of the fingers, the pad side of the fingers. Yeah, you can keep that in there too. And now you're just going to bring that tissue up. You feel the sternum,
Yeah.
breastbone in there? You're just going to go right up along the breastbone. Just bringing the bra down a couple of inches. You can catch up to where you was. Yeah, a little more central, right? Yeah, right along the edge of, that's it, right along the edge of the sternum. And just, nope, stay nice and slow so she'll melt. That's it. Come up along. And out. How'd that feel?
Good.
How'd that feel to you?
It felt really awkward at first, but once my hand got the idea of the contour that it was following.
Mm-hmm. So see what you've done here is...
Nervousness.
Forgot your nervousness, yeah, that's great. So you followed the contour of the front of the ribs all the way up the sternum, and then a little bit, and I sometimes use my knuckle for this, right out under the collarbone. If somebody's really held in across the front, no, that's not you.
Oh, no.
If somebody's really held in across the front, you can go in here and even with a knuckle, because that really takes the fingernails out of it, but it also makes it a little more strong.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems to me like some people are really tight under the collarbone and some people are really not tight.
Yep.
Like sunshine.
So that's very much a good point that you make, because we want to alter these techniques with what you find. If you don't have to do it 3 times under the collarbone if that area is loose, but if that area is really tight, you might repeat this piece of it more times, or next session, or whatever is necessary to help them. Okay, so I thought we would take a small variation here, since Bill has come in and represents the male of the species, and not only the male of the species, but the hirsute. And it's a little bit more difficult to do this kind of myofascial stretching when you're doing it on top of body hair. And short of asking your client to shave, there are 2 things you can do. One is to use lotion, not oil again, but lotion. And the second part of that is that when you come in to work with the body, you do not, as we did in the other cases, travel over the skin, because when you're traveling over the skin, you are pulling it with you. So here you can take the skin, bring it down, go in and engage with the level that you want to engage with, and bring it up to the degree that the skin will let you. Then you can go up an inch or so, depending on the mobility of the skin, come down, take a hold of the fascia underneath the skin, and we're using the same thing here. We're looking for how fast is that fascia melting. I'm right here at the edge between where the sternum is and where the ribs come in, and I'm just going to take the skin, pull it down, engage my fingers in, and bring the skin and my fingers up through that fascia to the limits of what the skin can comfortably take, and then once again bring the skin down and come up. It takes a little longer to do it this way, but it is definitely worthwhile in terms of the patient's comfort and the results. If you simply try doing what we were doing before, you're really going to give the person, what does that feel like to you?
Oh, you could just pull it out.
Okay, no, we won't do that anymore. So if I were doing this same, what I call the eye move, this move along the subcostal angle of the ribs and up along the, I can't think when I'm working, up along the sternum, then I might do that part moving along the skin, but then this part I could do in the manner that we just did. And the same thing when I got up here, I would move within what the skin would allow me, take some more skin, move within what the skin would allow me, take some more skin, move within what the skin would allow me. Okay? It brings up another variation while we're here, because as I come up on these ribs with Bill, what I feel is that right across this line and a little bit above it, there's a place where the ribs, where they come into the sternum, feel quite stuck or ungiving just at this moment. So I'm going to put one set of fingers on the front of his ribs, and yeah, just roll over this way just for a sec, and another set of fingers right in the back behind. I know this is not strictly part of the superficial front line, but look at the relationship here through the ribs. If you can let your right arm relax, Bill, and just let it fall on mine, it's great. Okay, now if you breathe right in here, yeah, that's it. I don't think I said this when we were doing the other version of this with the ladies, but the action of breathing is the movement. You remember in the legs we were using the foot up and down and the knee up and down. Well, when we're up here in the torso, we don't need to ask for movement so specifically, because the movement of breathing provides that movement. And by just sitting here with these joints, or more properly, with the tissue that overlays the joints, and connected to where the ribs connect in back with the fingers of my right hand, we can just let this melt. Perhaps you can see the difference in the angle with which his two shoulders are coming out of the neck after we did releasing the ribs on this one side. It really made a difference to his shoulder position. Does it feel any different to you, Bill, from side to side? Can you describe that at all?
Right shoulder feels as though it's farther back.
Closer to the table, meaning?
Closer to the table, more relaxed. Opened up.
All right, well, let's see if we can do something similar with this side. Okay, come on back. Back hand is pulling down, and my front hand is freeing the sternocondral joints, the sternocostal joints, where the ribs come into. So I'm not right in the middle of the sternum, I'm just right off to the side of the sternum. And if I'm doing anything with that tissue, I'm bringing it up. And what's that?
Well, it just feels as though the left one's come back as well. Surprise!
So the last technique brought us up to the top of the sternum. That's our next to last station, and our last track will be the sternocleidomastoid muscle, which will carry us right up to the mastoid process. The setup for the sternocleidomastoid technique is complex and important that you get it right. I'm going to put my hand on Sunshine's neck such that this line of my knuckles rests right along the leading edge of the sternocleidomastoid. I do not want to be on the front of the throat. That clearly would not be a nice thing to do. So I'm here. Almost all the time in all of these direct techniques that we're employing, my direction is the direction of my arm or the direction of my pelvis. This is an exception to that rule. I'm going to follow my fingertips. So having just simply engaged this fairly superficial muscle, there's the platysma on the top, but sternocleidomastoid is right there for you. I'm just going to drop my fingers, my knuckles back. I'm using this same whole surface that we used on the leg. I'm going to drop that whole surface toward the back of Sunshine's neck. At that point, she can still breathe. She's still got blood going to her head, and she's not feeling as if her breathing's being cut off. Now I want her to turn her head to the left. And when you say that to people, a lot of times people will do what Sunshine's doing now, which is to roll their head on the table to the left like a ball. And I don't want her to do that either. So I'm going to put my hand on the top of her head, and I'm going to urge her to turn left using the rotation of her neck. One of the things that you can tell the client is that they'll hear their hair on the table. You can't hear it much, but they can hear it because they're not just rolling their head on the table, they are rotating the neck around its axis. So having educated the client to that, having gotten the leading edge of the sternocleidomastoid and taking it back in the direction of my fingertips a little bit, I will then ask Sunshine now to turn, and she does most of the work by turning away from you. Do you feel the kind of pull on that, Sunshine?
Yes.
Okay. And once she's turned pretty much whatever her range of motion is towards that side, I continue along the neck, bringing this tissue toward the back. Now, I understand that I've gone off first the sternal head and then the cleidal head and past this space and then onto the leading edge of the trapezius. By the time you get down here, you're no longer working on the sternocleidomastoid, you're working on the trapezius, which we'll see again in the arm lines. But the fascial plane is the same between the sternocleidomastoid and the trapezius, and our idea here is to bring that tissue back, since with the head forward posture that tends to get carried forward. I'm circumnavigating her neck. My elbow is making a tour of her neck. I'm not just staying right on top and going that way, because when I get to the midline, I'll fall off. I have to lean out so that I can carry the work all the way around towards the back. So, did that feel okay?
Mm-hmm.
Some burning involved in that?
A little bit.
But not too bad.
No.
And no pressure on your windpipe.
Right.
That's what I'd like the folks back home to know for sure, that there's no pressure on the windpipe. All right, Susan, you ready to try this?
I am.
All right, use your left hand here. Good. So it's this next knuckle right there, right along the edge of the sternocleidomastoid. Good. Okay. And you let her turn first. So you have to tell her what to do.
So start to turn your head.
You feel that tissue pulling out from under your hand? You feel her stretching it out from under your hand?
Pressure's okay.
That's right. And you lean so that you can, how far back on her neck can you go before you fall off? That's it, that's it, that's it, that's it. When she's gone as far as she can go, then you go as far as you can go, and then let up. Good. So how's that?
Do it again?
Yes.
Yeah, do it again.
How was that
Excellent.
compared to? Oh, great.
Okay. So just let these knuckles soften so it's this surface. There you go. Okay. And you get enough to get a grip on that, and then you start moving that way, and then she moves away from you. You feel that pulling out from under your hand? She's pulling the tissue out.
This time I can more feel her doing the work.
Right, and now she's getting out to the limit of her thing, so you start doing your work, taking it in the opposite direction. Lovely. Okay.
I like that.
That's good.
So if you find that last technique a little daunting, or your client does, you can practice a variation of that and still get this sternal head of the sternocleidomastoid to lengthen out. I'm again going to place the edge of the knuckles here along the edge of Sunshine's sternocleidomastoid, but she's already turned to the left. I've already engaged so that, see how that superficial front line is a long line going right along there. So this, likewise, I am not going to push in, although it's, with her head turned, it's a lot safer to push in on the side of the neck here. I'm still going to be more lifting. And as I lift the sternocleidomastoid toward the mastoid process, I'm dropping my elbow to get that kind of scooping feeling of scooping the superficial fascia up towards. I'm definitely going behind the ear, not under the ear, but I'm also going to continue on up onto the mastoid process. The muscle stops here, but the fascia keeps going right up onto the scalp. So your client will feel a little incomplete if you stop too soon. You can carry this right on up. I'm going a little too fast now just to show you, but you can carry this right up onto the mastoid process, and if it's not pulling the hair too much, right onto the scalp where the fascia keeps going. Okay, Sunshine, if you want to just keep your chin in and tuck around to the other side, we'll let Susan try. You can generally see how prominent that sternocleidomastoid is, so you just put your knuckles right along that edge, and you're going to scoop that up by dropping your elbow. Just scoop that up. Whoa, whoa, whoa. I don't want you to go towards the ear. I want you to go behind the ear. Okay? That's it. That's the direction.
I feel like I lost.
You lost it there, right at the end. Yeah, okay, so try it again.
A little slower.
That's good. Does that feel good, Sunshine?
That's great.
Yeah, that looks like just right. And just don't lose it. Stay right on that bone. Use your little finger knuckle right up over the bone and onto the scalp itself.
Yeah.
Ça y est. Great.
Excellent.
Whenever you come to the close of any of these anatomy trains line sessions, or indeed any structural soft tissue bodywork session, you're going to want to spend some time with the neck and the lower back at the end. This will ensure that the work that you have been doing will be integrated, and that the changes that you've made in the structural body will be integrated into the two freestanding areas of the back, which of course are the cervicals and the lumbar. So as we've come to the finish of this session, I'm just coming and saying hello to Sunshine's neck and seeing what still remains that might be tight and letting the strain out of that. So we might include something down the side of the neck like this. Just taking her head slightly to the side and holding it and using my fingertips to ease out that leading edge of the trapezius. And one of my favorites, to get the laminar groove here, I bring my hand in from the opposite side, still cradling her head in my other hand, and bring my fingertips up the laminar groove toward her occiput, encouraging length in the deep muscles of the back of the neck. And easing out any tendency for the head to go into hyperextension and being pushed forward on the neck. Although we're just showing you these on one side for the videotape, obviously I would reach through and do them on the other side as well. See how the thumb just fits on the other side on the shoulder, which makes it very easy for you to bring your fingertips up. And the other thing that can be good when you finish the session is to ease out the muscles of the lower back, the other freestanding area of the spine in the lumbars. So I'm going to have Sunshine lie on her back with her heels pretty close to her rear end, and I'm going to ask her to press down on her feet and lift her pelvis up in the air. I'm going to put my hand under her pelvis so that her sacrum is resting on my wrist and forearm, and my hand, if I could ask you to turn on your side here, and my hand is on her back such that the spinous processes of her back are in between my middle finger and ring finger. And I'm almost at the top of the lumbars here. Different people, you'll be in different places. I'm going to reposition so we're in the right place. And now I'm putting my hand on the top of her knees, or I could put my hand on her belly, and I'm drawing my hand out toward her feet. This is the crucial part of this technique, is to draw out toward her feet, toward her heels directly. It is not a good idea, and it's something that's very easy to do. Come on up again, Sunshine, up in the air. What the easy thing to do is, when I'm doing this, is to pull my hand towards me, and I will turn her into a banana if I do that. So it's a little bit tricky with the body mechanics to pull directly down the spine, directly along the sacrum, and out toward the tailbone, and when you run out of juice. I'm just going to turn you on your side again and show the track of this is coming from here. My fingers grip up into the tissue like that, and bring the tissue with me as I come down. You can come right onto the sacrum, and at some point, when it feels right, you let go. So, Sunshine, just for one more time for the folks back home. Good. The nice thing here is you can really get this, when, depending on the pelvic tilt, you can really get somebody to understand where their lower back is in relation to the belly, in relation to the pelvis. So, Sunshine, how's your lower back feel now?
Great. I've never had it stretched like that. It feels wonderful.
Great. And you may notice now when you put your feet down that your lower back stays right where it was, yeah. So now you have a collection of techniques which, taken together, form a generalized approach to the superficial front line. I hope that you will take the material on this video and use it creatively to suit your own style and the needs of your clients. And I hope also that you'll consider looking at the other videos in this series that take on other parts of the body, other lines. But thank you for listening.